The pilot who landed a plane in a river. When both of the engines on US Airways Flight 1549 failed at 3,000 feet, the pilot only had 208 seconds to save 155 lives. But how did he do it? Stay tuned till the end to find out. It was early 2009 and the Great Recession was still ongoing. The economy was hurting and air travel was down across the country. It was January when a US Airways Airbus A320 took off from New York's LaGuardia Airport bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. On board were 150 passengers and crew, plus 5 crew members, a total of 155 people. The plane reached a cruising altitude of 3,000 feet. The pilots, Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger and First Officer Jeff Skiles, were well experienced and highly rated by their colleagues. There was nothing unusual about this flight until suddenly both engines failed. It wasn't a mechanical problem, but rather an unexpected flock of Canada geese that flew into the engines. This caused both engines to lose power, sending the jet into a terrifying free fall. Captain Sully quickly assessed the situation. He knew that they didn't have enough altitude to get to the nearest airport, so landing the plane on the runway was out of the question. Captain Sully quickly made a U-turn and started heading back to LaGuardia. Perhaps they could make an emergency landing on the runway there. However, the situation was critical. They had less than 200 seconds before they ran out of fuel. With no other options, Captain Sully set his eyes on the water below. Could he land the plane in the Hudson River? As the Airbus hurtled toward the cold waters of the Hudson, the passengers screamed in terror. Some prayed for their lives, while others thought this was the end. In a matter of minutes, the plane was over the river. The landing gear was deployed and the Airbus touched down on the water. The plane skidded on the surface of the water before finally coming to a stop. Miraculously, the plane was intact. Somehow, Captain Sully had managed to land the plane safely in the river. Everyone on board survived, and none of them even suffered serious injuries. News of the successful landing spread like wildfire. People were shocked. How had a plane full of people managed to survive a ditching in the Hudson River? How had Captain Sully managed to land the plane safely? What made it even more shocking was that the plane was a commercial jet. Commercial jets are designed to fly high in the sky, not to touch down on water. Yet somehow Captain Sully had managed to pull it off. He was immediately dubbed Miracle on the Hudson. People wondered if he had been a military pilot or had experience with amphibian aircraft. But neither was true. Sully was a seasoned commercial pilot who had flown the Airbus for years. A lot of people began to ask, what had prompted Sully to choose the river instead of trying to reach an airport? In the aftermath of the incident, 2 investigations were launched. The first was by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the second by the American airline. The investigation revealed that the bird strike had caused both engines to fail. This was confirmed by the fact that dead birds were found in the engines after the incident. But this also raised another question. Why had the pilots not noticed the flock of birds in time? Sully and Skiles claimed that they had been too low to see the flock of birds in time. However, this explanation did not sit well with the investigators. To understand what really happened, they turned to the cockpit voice recorder. This device records everything that happens in the cockpit. Investigators hoped that it would shed some light on why the plane had crashed. After listening to the recordings, they came to a stunning conclusion. Sully and Skiles had actually spotted the flock of birds, but they hadn't realized that the flock was big enough to cause damage to the engines. At the time of the bird strike, the plane was at 3,000 feet, much lower than its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Captain Sully had chosen to fly at a lower altitude because the weather was poor at higher altitudes. He never could have imagined that this decision would one day save everyone on board. Had they been flying at a higher altitude, the bird strike wouldn't have caused engine failure. But now they needed to figure out why Sully had chosen to land the plane in the river instead of trying to reach an airport. To answer that question, the investigators interviewed Sully and Skiles separately. Their answers were almost identical. They said they had calculated that they wouldn't make it to any airport in time. The closest airport was Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, but by the time they reached it, their plane would have no fuel left. This was confirmed by the fact that the plane had lost all of its fuel by the time it landed in the river. Sully and Skiles had tried to contact air traffic control to inform them of their situation, but they had been unable to do so because they had lost power to the radio equipment. This is standard procedure in the event of a bird strike. As soon as the engines fail, the pilots try to contact air traffic control to inform them of the situation and to ask for help. However, in this case, the pilots were unable to do so because they had lost power to the radio equipment. This meant that they had no way of knowing what airports were close by. All they knew was that they had to land the plane as soon as possible, and so they chose the river. After reviewing all the evidence, the NTSB concluded that Sully had made the right decision. Landing the plane in the river had been the best option available to him. If he had tried to reach an airport, there was a good chance that the plane would have crashed. But why had he chosen to fly so low? According to the investigators, he had done so because the weather was better at lower altitudes. This was actually standard procedure at the time. Pilots were instructed to fly at lower altitudes if the weather at higher altitudes was bad. This was because the lower altitudes were safer. However, this policy has since been changed. Now, pilots are instructed to fly at higher altitudes, even if the weather is bad, because it is safer. The reason for this is that the lower the plane flies, the more likely it is to encounter birds. Birds are attracted to airports because they know that there is food there. This is why most airports are located away from residential areas. But even if they are, the planes still have to fly over populated areas to get to the airport. This means that they are likely to encounter birds, especially if they are flying at low altitudes. That's why airlines have begun to require their pilots to fly at higher altitudes, even if the weather is bad. In the end, Sully's decision to fly at a lower altitude probably saved everyone on board. Had he been flying at a higher altitude, the bird strike wouldn't have caused engine failure. But as it was, he was able to use the river to bring the plane down safely. Many people believe that Sully was a hero. After all, he did save everyone on board. However, Sully himself disagrees. He believes that he was just doing his job. "I don't consider myself a hero," he once said. "I was just doing what I was trained to do." Sully's heroism was recognized by many organizations, including the Airline Pilots Association, which awarded him the Wright Brothers Memorial Trophy, the highest honor it can bestow. Sully has retired from flying, but he continues to speak about the importance of training and preparation. "The truth is, I had a very ordinary day," he told an audience at the TED Talk. "Nothing unusual happened until something unusual did happen, and then we handled it with extraordinary measures. But the preparation, the training, the policies, the procedures, those were all extraordinary in the making. And those are the things that you should be focusing on, because every day can be an extraordinary day if you prepare for it in an extraordinary way." Do you think Sully was a hero? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you next time.